This is Duke University.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sterling Wilder, class of '83, and the Director of Alumni Affairs, and we are excited to be here and appreciate you attending and such a terrific turnout for tonight. So thank you so much, and we have a little thunder and lightning show we did earlier, so that'll be your entertainment while I'm talking, and of course it'll convince you to stay because you don't want to go out in that storm. But we know it's going to be a terrific evening, and so again, thank you for making time, and I also want to thank our volunteers who were out working at the table and checking you in, and appreciate all their help with events throughout the year, and more on Duke alumni events in New York in just a few minutes. As I said, we're excited to be in New York, and we're especially delighted to have with us this evening President Broadhead, as well as one of Duke's most distinguished, and I would have to say coolest, faculty members, Dan Ariely, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. As you know, Dan is the James P. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics at our Fuqua School of Business. We're also pleased that Cindy Brodhead was able to join us this evening, Bob Shepard, Vice President for Alumni Affairs and Development, Mike Schoenfeld, Vice President for Public Affairs, and Richard Riddell, Vice President and University Secretary. So what is the Duke idea? Hopefully there were a lot of you who were with us in New York in 2009 when President Broadhead interviewed alums and noted TV commentators and journalists Judy Woodruff and John Harwood. That was following the presidential election, and it was a great discussion about voting and politics and elections, and just really an engaging time. And we know that tonight's program will be equally so. So this is the third year of our Duke Idea International Tour, and one that we believe has been incredibly successful, which is why we're still doing it and back on the road. So tonight, for those of you that weren't here before, it's a little bit of a different spin on our traditional alumni event, where we bring the intellectual excitement of Duke directly to you, our alumni and parents and friends in the regions. And through each of these events and President Broadhead's conversation with his guests who have been deans, senior administrators, faculty, alums, you and alumni around the world have been able to hear firsthand about the new and innovative programs that they're working on and their successes. And so through these events, we're able to showcase Duke's priorities and our goals in an engaging and intellectual setting. So this is our fifth Duke Idea this year, and just a couple of examples of our programs. We did one in November with Shane Battier, which was really fun and very cool. Right before but of course he was traded, so we were lucky to fit that in. And then we were in January. I know it's a nice time in January to be in Miami, where it was great, where we were with Kim Rorschach, who's the director of the National Museum of Art, as well as alum Jason Rubel, class of '91, who many of you may know with the Rubel collection. And then a few weeks ago, we were in Boston with Victor Zhao, who, as you know, is the chancellor of the health system and the leader of our medical enterprise at Duke. And to tell you about these is not to tell you about our exciting travel schedule, but more to tell you about the array of programming that we're doing to really showcase the variety of Duke's efforts and our priorities, and to give a good sense to different audiences around the country about what we're doing. So for upcoming events and to see previous Duke Ideas, you can go to our website. And also, we'll send you the link later this week with information about Dr. Ariely's work and his books and his publications, so you'll be able to follow along on that. So in just a few minutes, President Broadhead will come to this stage, which looks a little bit like his office. You can notice, of course, the Duke there, which isn't the view outside of his office, but nonetheless, it is a Duke view. And he will give you a brief update on Duke, and then Dr. Ariely will make his way up to the stage, and you know, we'll have a lively conversation and discussion, and they're going to address the question, among many questions that they'll talk about, is how to use social science to improve the world. So I know you'll have questions or comments for our guests, and if you could hold those until the end of the session, that would be terrific. And if you could also turn off your BlackBerries and your cell phones, that would be great. I love this part. This is when everybody leans over, they pull out of their bags, reach in their pockets. So before I turn the program over to President Broadhead, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Duke's presence in New York. So the number of alums in Metro New York is just over 11,000, which of course ranks right up there, but not quite as much as our area, the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area. You have 842 people who claimed and are volunteers for Duke that live in the area, and 135 of you serve on boards either in the New York area or on campus for Duke. And in the last 12 months, there were 87 New York events for Duke in New York through all schools and programs and basketball games and all kinds of events. And there are about 15 or so folks who work really hard to put on most of those events throughout the year. Another interesting and important effort that alums participate in New York and in events all around the country are the Alumni Admissions Program. And so we have 4,000 volunteers around the world who interview prospective Duke undergraduates. And last year, of the almost 30,000 applicants, over half of those were interviewed by alums. And obviously, it's a big program in New York where we have 11 folks who chair our Alumni Admissions, or AAAC. And just for your information, thought you might want to know that over 2,558 students applied for admissions to Duke. Of those, 269 were early decision applicants and 111 were admitted. And regular applicants, there were 2,289, of which 258 were admitted. And so we hope all of those will say yes and come to Duke, because why wouldn't you, of course? We all did, so we think everybody should. So how do you engage with Duke? Well, a lot of the statistics and information that I just shared with you are very key ways that you can be part of Duke, but there are also so many more ways. You can read the Duke magazine, you can come to homecoming. We just finished an amazing reunion weekend on campus, which also had some thunder and lightning and rain, but nonetheless, it was wonderful. You talk to a roommate, you watch a basketball game. All of these ways are really important ways to engage with Duke. In particular this evening, I'd like to talk about one particular program that we're working on called Duke Alums Engage. And the New York Duke Alums Engage event will take place on April 30th. And about 2 years ago, the members of the Alumni Association Board thought, we have this wonderful Duke Engage program for students, so why shouldn't alums be involved in active community service in their communities? So, civic engagement in their communities. So we had a pilot launch last year, about 20 cities. And now in their 2-week period, in the end of April through the beginning of May, over 40 cities around the world will have alums and parents and friends working on a civic engagement project in their regions. And so we're really excited about that. The New York crew is very lively and excited, and you'll be seeing them with long name tags throughout the rest of the evening. And again, it's April 30th. It's a free community health and fitness day in Central Harlem with the Children's Aid Society. And what will happen, there'll be sports activities, medical screenings, health fair, wellness seminar, and we expect more than 500 adults and children from Central Harlem to participate, and 150 to 200 Duke alums there. So it's going to be a pretty amazing day. So you'll hear more about that throughout the evening, and then there'll be flyers at the desk. So all of these points of engagement are really important and why you should be excited and involved with Duke. So our job at the Alumni Association is to continue to make sure we have these ways for you to engage, to make sure that they fit your life, whether you're younger or older, you're an undergraduate alum, professional school alum, all of these, our job is to make sure that we provide vibrant programming and that it's also meaningful and enjoyable and it adds value to your life. So the tagline of the Alumni Association is Forever Duke. And so that's really what it is. It is a lifetime of association, again, no matter what your age or your degree. And that's why you're here, because it is about Forever Duke. So at the end of the program this evening, I hope that you will have a chance to visit with the Duke staff members who are here, who would love to say hello and greet some old friends and make some new ones. The reception will also continue, and then we'll be through with our evening. But now, finally, onto the program. So it's my pleasure to introduce Duke's 9th president, who is Richard Brodhead. And since becoming president in July of 2004, President Broadhead has ushered in a new era of expansion, investment, and altruism at Duke. From the creation of the Duke Global Health Institute and the successful completion of our financial aid initiative to the launch of our civic service program, again, Duke Engage, President Broadhead has been a true leader for our university. And if you haven't had a chance to meet him, I hope you will so tonight. He is truly an amazing man, and if you had been at reunions, you would know that he is also indefatigable and a lot of fun. President Broadhead.
Well, thank you very much, Sterling. This is, I believe, the widest audience I have ever addressed. And I'm trying to figure out if I could detach my eyes from one another so each of them could roam so that I could make sure to see all of you at every point in the evening. It's fascinating. Happy to have you here. And you must be marveling at the fact that the President's office is temporarily located on the Hudson River. Who knew? It seems a great idea. It was a dark and a stormy night, but here we are gathered inside. I would like to thank all of you for coming, and I would like to say a special shout out, if I could, to the members of the Duke in New York program who are here in some number. These are Duke students, juniors, who are here studying economics and finance in classes, but also by going to real world settings, also taking classes in New York architecture and walking tours, and it all sounded fun to me. I must say, I walked into that room with 600 of you, and I saw, you know, Duke calls itself, as you know, such a young school. And I saw these people, and I thought, these alums are really young. And indeed, that's because they were not alums. The rest of you look young, too. I'll just say a few words of news to you, and then I'll get to the substance of tonight's entertainment. This is April. You'll remember that the poet Chaucer spoke of April as the month of sweet showers and the month when people like to go on little trips. Dan longen folk to go on pilgrimages. And so it is that we have had people going on little trips to Durham recently. We had 4,000 alums come back on little trips last weekend, walking around oohing and eyeing at the libraries that now exist, the art museums that now exist, the things that did not exist in their day. We also are in the middle of being visited, I believe today is one of the first days, by our admitted students. I want the fact to sink in on you that we had 29,765 applicants for undergraduate admission at Duke this year. Some of them got in, and they are coming and looking the place over. And what will they see? Just to remind you, it being April, it is the third month of spring at Duke. That's good. And therefore, the tulips are out, the dogwood is out, you know, so I mean, it's just totally great. But of course, everybody knows the physical beauty of Duke you take for granted after 2 or 3 minutes because it's just the excitement of what goes on there that really defines the place. What could you have done in the last week or 10 days? Jane Goodall, the person who learned that chimpanzees do use tools and fashion them, the person who learned that other primates than man are able to organize group activities and strategies, including group warfare, through her work with chimpanzees in the Congo over the last 50 years. She kept notes for 50 years, you know, starting with her first field work in the early 1960s. The day has come when she had to decide, where does one put this unrivaled archive of information of primate studies? She's given it on deposit to Duke because Duke is the principal, or one of the principal centers for primate studies in the United States. One more cool thing at Duke. Last week, I asked 3 students to come to my office, perfectly ordinary people. One of them had just won the NCAA Individual Championship in fencing, Becca Ward. You may know her because she also won a medal at the last Olympics before, and therefore had to come 2 weeks late to her freshman year. Another student, Abby Johnston, who had won the Springboard National Championship individual medal in diving. Another student named Nick McCrory, who had won the same award, individual national championship for platform diving. So they came, and you look and you just think, no one in this country was better than you at this thing you do. So let's talk about something else. And so So what do you find out? You find out that the two divers, of course, are pre-med, and one of them is majoring in math, and they do all kinds of other magnificent, irrelevant extracurricular activities. You discover that Becca Ward is not planning to compete in the next Olympics. She already has a medal, of course, but she said, I could compete in fencing until I'm almost 40, so what I'm going to do is concentrate on my academics while I'm in Duke, and this summer she will not be in Olympic training. Instead, she will be in Duke Engage, working in Washington, D.C., which just seems fantastic to me. When I go home, I will get to give the Academy Awards of Duke University. There is a course on American film taught by Michael Malone. People study all the films. They write papers on all the films. They also make films. I have myself appeared in some of these films. And there is a glitterati event in which the best actor, best director of the Duke films are given out. Nolan Smith won Best Supporting Actor last year. And he said what I found very touching, that the award was, he just won the national championship in basketball, but lots of people have done that. He said that this award was supremely gratifying because it was the first award he had ever won that was not for basketball. Okay? So this is just Duke, you know, an ordinary day at Duke. You could be studying finance and New York architecture, or you could be in a play, or you could be studying primates, or a million other things. It's been a great time for us. We'll say this quickly. We hope we are now through the recession. It hit us like everyone else. We took necessary steps fairly quickly and without a lot of Sturm und Drang, and that's been good. And one way I think we might conclude that we are through the recession is that on the 7th of March, I stood on a stage and received the largest gift ever given to Duke University. This was an $80 million gift for the purpose of completely rehabbing the West Union and Page Auditorium and Baldwin Auditorium. Think what those buildings are. Those are the great common rooms of the university. Those are the places where people go in to eat and then see people they didn't expect to see and sit down and have memorable conversations. They're places where you go hear Jane Goodall, or if you were in Page tonight, Salman Rushdie is speaking, having been brought there by a student group, naturally. These are the places where your mind is stretched by seeing the talent of the world and stretched by seeing the talent of your contemporaries. And it just seems to me really a wonderful thing to think that those buildings can now have the magic wand touch them the way it touched Perkins Library and made it a fantastic modern facility. You know, these buildings have needed some love. And I would just like to say, when you come back for your X reunion in the future, you will walk in and say, I can't believe that it was even possible that these could become these things. But that's what we want to do, and why these buildings transformed will make a difference, I believe, in the experience of every Duke student every day. What makes the biggest difference in the life of every student every day at a university? One's classmates, but also the faculty. And I'm now making a subtle transition in the direction of Dan Ariely. And Dan, maybe just sometime as I finish this transition, you would end up sitting in the chair on that side. Okay.
This side?
Nice shoes. Where are the red ones? I could introduce, those of you over here, I want to tell you that the podium will soon go away and your obstructed views will be improved. I could introduce Dan Ariely two ways, both of which would be truthful, but one a little tedious. I'll start with that one. I'll tell you things that are factually true about Dan Ariely. He was born in New York. His parents were Israeli. His father was here studying, so they went back to Israel. He was brought up in Israel. He went to university in Tel Aviv, where he studied things like philosophy and math and physics. He came to America and got a Ph.D. in cognitive psychology at UNC. And then, the nightmare of every modern parent, he went back and got a second Ph.D., or the pride of every parent, who can say, at Fuqua at Duke in business administration. And then he got a job The job was at MIT. He taught at the Sloan School, a very distinguished place to teach. And after some years, I believe the year was 2008, he came back to Duke as, I hope I can get this right, the James B. Duke Professor of Psychology and Behavioral Economics, cross-appointed in the Fuqua School of Business, I think the Economics Department, I think the Medical School, and someplace else too. Oh, the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience. And in his leisure, he has written some books that have come to more than average attention in the world of academic writing, namely the fantastic, fascinating, and best-selling books, Predictably Irrational and The Upside of Irrationality. All this is true, and I am glad to have you as my colleague. Now I'll tell the story the way I would really tell it. Which is, you know, at the end of the day, people aren't characterized by the facts of their life. They're characterized by the nature of their life. And I just associate Dan Ariely with the ultimate academic virtue, the purest curiosity coupled with the purest intellectual creativity. You think to present problems that other people have walked past. You think to think of them in fresh ways. His main contribution he is a leader when we talk about behavioral economics. You need to understand this is positioned over against the classic understanding of economics that man is a rational animal who acts in his or her rational self-interest on all occasions. These are people who never took an English course, one might say, in which you would have learned from Jonathan Swift that man is not the rational animal. Swift called him the animal rationis capax, the animal capable of reason, which is a little different. You, having studied the blend of rationality and irrationality, have then turned your attention not to recherche academic subjects, but to the most everyday facts of life. Dan is a leading scholar of the fact that we really, for all we might think, typically don't know what the price of something should be until we have some information supplied contextually that enables us to see it in some relative terms. I learned from Dan, one reason why restaurants want to put really expensive entrees on the menu is not so people will order that, but because then they will order the next more expensive entree, which otherwise would have been far too expensive for them to order. Dan is the person who has established, imagined that it needed to be established, that humans, it is a rare human who is willing to be massively dishonest, but an ordinary human who is willing to be marginally dishonest. I say this in the week in which we will all file our tax returns. Dan is the person who has illustrated for us that although we think incentives incent people to what we want them to do, in fact, incentives can work pro and con, and a high incentive can actually discourage the behavior it wishes to incent as well as encourage other behaviors. I've given 3 examples. Read his book and you'll know 300. This is the kind of author very annoying to people who know you when you read them because you keep interrupting them and saying, listen to this, listen to this. It's a very brilliant kind of mind. It brings practicality, imagination, wit, and the things he discovers are things we all know the truth of. We don't need, they're not true by virtue of the academic proof, but by virtue of the fact that they're established in our experience. This is also a person, a magnificent teacher. His appointment in Fuqua, but he is currently teaching an undergraduate class. There are 500 students. It must be quite similar to this room here. Yeah, good. What is one of the assignments in the class? I learned this by talking to a student who works in my office. One assignment is find an academic paper that tells something about human behavior and then write a memo in which you tell the CEO of some practical concern what difference that would make for the way they do something. It seems an obvious exercise, but it is just sort of pulling things across the border from the academic to the experiential. That's actually quite rare, and I think will give his students their own chance for creativity. Please join me.
By the way, it sounded like a really good idea for a class exercise, but then last Thursday I got 500 papers to grade. And they're all
I'll tell
different.
you what, we'll hand them out later and each of us will read one of them. Please join me in welcoming Dan Ariely.
Thank you.
Now, as the views improve on stage right, So let me ask you, I'll ask you some more profound questions in a minute, but I'll start with this one. So you taught somewhere else, and then you came back to teach at Duke. And there must have been rational elements to that decision, but I would predict there would be irrational elements to that decision. Would you like to give us a little analysis of the human dimensions of the fact that you're on the faculty of Duke?
So I'll give a few reasons. So actually, when I graduated, I begged my advisor to keep me at Duke, and he said no. And I think that kind of made me want to come back even more, like, you know, rejection. So it took a few years, and one of the interesting things about thinking about coming back was that all my old professors were there, and I was wondering, the son of my advisor is here. So, and advisors are really like parents. It's very hard to not think of them like parents. Like when John gives me a compliment, I still get excited, and when he says something not that good, I still get very, I feel like a kid who hasn't done well. So I was wondering before I came back is how would I feel as somebody who came back? Would I feel just like a student? And the truth is I still feel like a student. I have a better office. But aside from that, it's a wonderful communal feeling. The other thing that was very interesting is that the university is actually very interdisciplinary. And that was something I missed for a while. And I like the fact that I have an appointment in the medical school, and I have lots of colleagues there, and I have colleagues in neuroscience, and I do things in economics and psychology. Right. And that has been all, I expected it to be this nice, but it's been very rewarding.
You've prolonged your youth.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I've known people who've gone to get a degree in cognitive psychology, and I've known people who've gone to get a degree in business administration, but I've typically thought of that as like a fork in the road. But for you, one of them led to the other. So tell me, just give me a little sense of the convergence, for your experience of the convergence of the study of psychology and the study of business.
Yeah. So, you know, what motivated me to come back to study psychology in the beginning was a very practical interest in human life. So I was in the burn department for a long time, and I observed lots of irrational things in hospital. Anybody who's been in hospital for a long time get to do this. And I basically thought of psychology as a way to solve these problems. So one of the first questions that bothered me was, how do you remove bandages from burn patients? Do you rip them off quickly, or do you take them off slowly? Other questions were about how do you take every day very difficult treatment, knowing that it's potentially good for the long term, but very hard in the short term. So I was very kind of practically minded. I thought of psychology as a way to figure out what people are doing wrong and think about tools to fix it. Mm-hmm. And I was trying to do that, but it turned out that a business school was a better place to do it. So when I was getting my master's at UNC, Danny Kahneman, who later won the Nobel Prize in economics, asked me to come and meet him here in New York. And we spent the whole day together, and part of his argument was that if I want to really use decision-making in an applied setting, I should move to a business school. So that's basically what I did. So everything I do is really kind of designed. I think of myself as a social hacker. You know, hacking is a really nice thing, right? You look at a process, some server, virus, whatever it is, and you think about where are the points where you can intervene. And hackers don't have a religion. They could use whatever tools they have to basically get the system to yield in a way that they want to do it. And I basically think of psychology as a tool for hacking, or I think about, you know, understanding human motivation. So there's a particular behavior that I think people are not doing the right way, and I'm willing to take every possible approach to try and fix it and correct it. So I didn't really fit psychology that much because I didn't have kind of one theory I cared about. Right. And the business school really provided me with a great opportunity where they're basically agnostic about theories. Okay.
But your first appointment, I think, was in marketing, right?
Yeah.
And you could say, well, marketing has always been understood to have a psychological dimension. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about this business. You know, if you start predictably irrational, that is one of the first demonstrations, is this business that humans have no intrinsic sense of the value of things, and so you need contextual clues to make you understand how much you'd pay for something?
Yeah. So this is actually a good month to talk about this. A long time ago, there was a guy called Asael who basically thought about the black pearls. And I described this story, and he died this month. He had a obituary in the New York Times, and he basically came up with these black pearls, and he tries to sell them. And people say, ooh, black pearls, not willing to pay anything for it. And this didn't look very good for him. So he went to Harry Winston, the famous jeweler, and he said, why don't you put these black pearls in your window with diamonds and rubies and all kinds of things and make them feel that they're better. Now, if you think about it, without having any context, are black pearls better or worse than white ones? Not really clear, right? So he did one attempt, it didn't work well, he came back, he tried another attempt, he reframed black pearls as much more desirable, and they've been more desirable for 50, 60 years, right? Where does it come from, right? We almost take it for granted that they're more valuable. But why? Well, it turns out one guy got to talk to Harry Winston, and he basically created this incredible market in which we all believe now that black pearls are more useful. And actually, if you take a step back and you say, let's think about simple stuff we do all the time. Let's think about a cup of coffee.
Yeah, because now we're getting to Dunkin' Donuts.
How much is a cup of coffee worth? How do you figure it out? If you think about the logic of money, it's supposed to be the opportunity cost. You should say to yourself, what am I giving up now and in the future for the pleasure of having coffee? And if my opportunity cost is larger, I shouldn't do it. And if my opportunity cost is lower, I should do it. That's an incredibly difficult exercise. So what do we do when something is really hard for us to do the right way? We do it the wrong way. Right? And what's the wrong way? Well, there's lots of wrong ways. One of them is looking at relative valuations. How much does coffee cost somewhere else? How much does it cost compared to Coke? Whatever we can do a relative. Actually, one of my, not mine, but one of my favorite experiments is what's called the endless soup bowl experiment. So imagine you come and you given a bowl with 8 ounces of soup. You say, go ahead and eat the soup. And you eat the soup, and afterward we ask, how good is the soup and how much do you like it? Great. The other group get the same bowl of soup, but unbeknownst to them, there's a little hose connected from the bowl, and as they eat soup, more soup is being pumped into the bowl. Now, they don't know it, so they eat and they eat and they eat and they eat, and at some point, it's like a Jewish mother's dream, at some point, you have to say stop. You have to tell them to stop. And you have to tear them away from the soup, because they say, we haven't finished yet. But you tear them away from the soup and you say, how satisfied do you feel? So not completely not full, because look, there's soup left. It turns out that
excuse me.
It turns out that we don't really have good sensors for how much soup we had in our stomach. So what do? We compare it to the size of the bowl. If we finish the soup, we feel good. If we haven't finished the soup, we don't feel good. So we have this relative comparison to whatever there is. Other cup of coffee, the size of the cup, whatever there is. And those are the comparisons that actually dictate our decisions.
This is pretty good. So let me ask you about this honesty thing.
Yes.
I've been in rooms where you've talked and everybody's fascinated by everything you say. But when you talk about that particular one, I notice people stiffen a little bit, like you know something about them personally.
Yeah, so honesty is very tricky. And you know, we all kind of recognize the blue-collar criminals, and we realize that's bad. But it turns out it's a very small problem in the aggregate. Like financially, that's really cheap. The real problem is all the good people who cheat just a little bit. And it turns out it's incredibly endemic and systematic and everywhere. And of course, you can think about healthcare system and the financial system. And what turns out to be the case is if you pay people a certain amount of money to see reality in a distorted way, they would see it in a distorted way. And in some way, we all know this lesson. We all know that when we see Duke basketball against somebody else, we can't see the referee calls in an objective way. We're going to be biased in our perception. And you know, in basketball, it might be good. But what about if your doctor has these incentives? I'll tell you two stories about this. One is, so I had a really miserable time a few months ago. So I went on NPR, and I talked about conflicts of interest with dentists. Before I continue, anybody here is a dentist? Okay. So I basically said 3 things about dentists. I said that we got some data from a dental insurance company that shows, is this taped? it showed that if one dentist see a cavity in an X-ray, the probability that a second dentist will see the same cavity in the same tooth is about 50%. That's not very high. You know. I also said that we have data that shows that as the relationship with you and your dentist increases, you become more loyal, you've seen them longer, chances are that when they have to choose between doing something that is good for you and is good for them, as the relationship progresses, it will go more for them rather than for you. And you will follow because you've been with them for such a long time, you trust them. And finally, I said something I have no evidence about. I said that I think that I think dentistry is a good example of cognitive dissonance. You know, you sit there in the dentist chair, it's unpleasant, it's not fun, it's painful, and you say to yourself, how could it be? How could I behave like this? And you say to yourself, there must be a fantastic dentist. Otherwise, I wouldn't choose to visit with him. Anyway, the next morning, I got woken up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I was in California by the head of the, I did one more stupid thing. I mentioned the name
This is the fourth.
Yes, yeah. I mentioned the name of the insurance company who gave us this data. That was huge. So the next morning I got woken up by the head of this insurance company who said, why did you talk about us? And you know, the truth is that Robert Siegel kind of got it out of me. And then the head of the American Dental Association was trying to convince me to take my words, I mean, to basically retract. Turns out you can't retract things that are true. It doesn't work like this. But then I had really a miserable week. First of all, I had like a week-long dreams about lawyers and dentists. And at the end of that week, this head of the American Dental Association wrote an email to 155,000 dentists asking them to write me personally about this. So as you can imagine, I got lots of emails from angry dentists. And the email basically has 3 paragraphs. All the emails are the same. The first paragraph, it says, Dan, you're an idiot. I can't believe Duke hired you. How do you get it? Something like that. The second paragraph, it says, I, the dentist, always do what's best for my clients. I never, never, never do anything that is not in the absolute best interest of my clients. And the third paragraph is saying, but it's true that other dentists do all kind of terrible. And that's the problem with conflicts of interest, right? We can't see it on ourselves. We can very easily see it on others. Mm-hmm. So I write this dentist, and I say, you know, let's talk about something else, like heart surgery. I said, do you think that people have put too much stents, heart stents, that people put it unnecessarily because they get paid a lot of money to do it? And I said, absolutely so. There's lots of evidence for that. And I said, do you think that doctors do it because they're evil or because they have conflicts of interest? Of course, because they have conflicts of interest, not because they're evil. And then I said, don't you think it can happen in dentistry as well? They said, maybe not in my clinic. So the problem with dishonesty is really that when we get paid to see reality in a distorted way, we can do it, and we don't see ourselves doing it. Right? And it's a huge problem that we just not aware of. You can say one more thing? Yesterday I had a comedian from New York come to my class. So I taught my class yesterday, and there's this guy called Jeff Kreisler who has a show. Usually you go to a stand-up comedy, and he has a show, How to Get Rich While Cheating. And he came to my class, and I present him as a consultant for McKinsey and Enron. And, so we don't say that he's a comedian, and he basically kind of convinced the kids. He basically tried to tell them how if they really want to be rich. And he says, why are you here? Who here is rich? He said, no, you're all poor. You need to be rich. Here is what you do. And he basically kind of eggs them on, and he gets them excited. And he said, close your eyes. What would you do with your first $10 million? And they come up with all kinds of ideas. He said, no, think big. He said, I bought a giraffe. That my 2 favorites, he said, think Fabergé egg omelette. Think dodo bird filet. And anyway, they get excited. And he basically tries to get them to realize that if they only abandon their morality completely, they could become very wealthy. And the students know that he is right, and they are disturbed at the same time. And then that's when I come and start talking about cheating and the problems with this. But anyway, mostly we just don't see it coming.
Okay. So here's what I want to ask you. I think we all know that other people are irrational, if not ourselves. That's your point just now. But it's interesting to me, this idea of predictably irrational, because it suggests that you can actually build rational systems based on understanding the irrationality of actors rather than the rationality. And that's what you begin by saying, that you went from psychology to business because that gave you a place to have sort of practical input. So how would you take these things, take either of the ones or take any other, these things you've studied about human psychology, how can you put that back out as a practical intervention to make some situation different?
Okay, so let's think about something very simple, the problem with time. So let's just, a little survey. How many people here have eaten this week more than you hope you would have eaten? Few. How many people exercise less than you wish you did? Okay. How many people, we can ask other questions. How many people have had more unprotected sex than you wish you? Very few. So it turns out, I had 2 glasses of wine. I guess demonstrating the point. But this is the problem of intertemporal choice. Imagine I ask you, what do you want? Half a box of chocolate right now, and I pass the chocolate around, and it's beautiful, Godiva chocolate, and you got to smell it and see it, and I say, do you want half a box of chocolate now, or do you want to wait a week and get a full box of chocolate? How many people would wait? Okay, maybe 10%, and I assure there will be less of you if we actually pass the chocolate. It's easy to say in abstract. Now imagine I push the choice to the future, and I said, what would you rather have? Half a box of chocolate in a year, or a full box of chocolate in a year and a week? It's the same exact decision. It's asking you whether you would wait another week for another half a box of chocolate. But how many people would wait now? Everybody, right? Because in the future, we're wonderful people. We will exercise, we will diet, we'll save money, we'll do all these wonderful things in the future. The problem is we never get to live in the future. We get to live now, and in now we succumb to temptation. Chocolate, exercising, not saving, and so on. So let's think about one practical problem this is a function of, which is medical compliance. Medical compliance is all about delayed gratification. If you took some medication that was unpleasant, if you took it, it might be good for the future, but it will be unpleasant now. In my particular case, when I was a student, I participated in an FDA protocol that was ran at Duke, in which they gave me interferon to try and combat a disease I got from a bad blood transfusion in hospital, not the Duke hospital. So I had this liver disease for many years, and they figured out what it was. It was hepatitis C, and they were trying to figure out what interferon was going to fight. And I had these medications which were miserable. Every medication I took, I was sick for about 16 hours. Headache, vomiting, shaking, stuff like that. Now, theoretically, if I took my medication all the time, a year and a half, 3 times a week, I might not have liver cirrhosis in 30 years. But if I took it, I would be really miserable 3 times a week for a year and a half. Now, ask yourself, if you had an injection in your hand and you could inject yourself and be really miserable for the next 16 hours, for maybe not getting sick in 30 years, would you do it? Right? That's a trade-off. So the solution I developed for myself was that I started watching movies immediately after I gave myself the injections. So I love movies, and I basically created a deal with myself that I injected myself and I started watching a movie. Now, if you think about it, it's really strange, because livers are really important, side effects are much less, and movies are even less important. But so how could the movies motivate me? We call this reward substitution, with the idea that if something is very delayed, the reward is very delayed, it is unlikely to have enough power to motivate us. Could we really care about what would happen 30 years from now? Very hard to imagine. Actually, think about global warming.
Sure.
Could we get people to be excited about global warming? Could we get people to wake up in the morning and feel that today they're going to do something good for global warming? Very hard. In fact, if you went on it the other way and you said, let's create a problem that people would not care about, you would come up with global warming. Right? Think about all the elements. Long in the future would happen to other people first. You don't see it progressing You don't see it moving. You don't see anybody suffering. And anything you would do is a drop in the bucket. Could you really care? So let's think about the practical applications. We've been doing studies with internet-enabled pill boxes. Imagine a pill box that every time you take your pill, I know about it. This is, imagine something like Coumadin or, you can imagine all kinds of medications. And the question is, do people have the incentives to take the medication for their own purpose, to be healthy? The answer is no. Can we do reward substitution? I motivate myself with movies. Can we do other things? So we've been doing experiments like this. For example, what do you think would happen if you pay people $3 a day to take their medication on time? Would it help? Yeah. Sadly, no. Not enough money. What do you think happened if we paid them thousands? I think it would work. We haven't tried it. But $3 doesn't work. Now, if we had more money, maybe we could pay people more, but we said, what else could we do? How about if we charge people when they don't take their medication on time? We have a principle called loss aversion, which is the idea that people hate losing more than we enjoy gaining. Of course, the stock market illustrated this over the last few years. So what happened when we charge people $3 a day? Turns out they take it more often. But the most clever experiment was actually not done by me. It was done by George Lowenstein. And they took two principles and added them together. The first one was that people love lotteries. So $3 is motivating. What about if you gave people 10% chance of making $30? That's much more exciting. Right? But the most interesting one was the one in which they combined regret and lotteries. So how does regret work? Regret is a really interesting emotion. Regret is not about where we are, but it's about how we can imagine we would have been somewhere else. So when would you be more upset? If you missed your flight by 2 minutes or by 2 hours? 2 minutes. Why? Because you're this close. Right? You can be stuck in the same airport food, but if you can imagine you would have been somewhere else, it helps. So how does it work? Imagine that the people on my right are taking the medication on time, people on my left are not. If we do this lottery without regret, everybody who takes the medication gets a lottery ticket, and I call you up and I say, congratulations, you're the winner of the lottery, you made $30. If we add regret, we give a ticket to everybody. And I call you up and I say, congratulations, you're the winner of the coveted lottery. It's your lucky day. The stars are smiling on you. Sadly, I see you did not take your pill today, so you're not getting the money. What happens now? Compliance rate with anti-stroke medication moves from 60% to 97%. So the point is that if you think about it, we do lots of things that just don't take human character and human ability into account. And what we're really concerned with is saying, how do we design the environment to take some of our weaknesses into account and to overcome some of them? Long answer.
Yeah, but it's pretty interesting. I'm just thinking, well, like the Social Security going bankrupt when I'm 87, right? Not a reason to raise the age for retirement now, right? Because it has all the features. I mean, our world is full of problems that fit the nature you described. So you've been working more recently, I think, on the phenomenon of the effect of annoying behavior on people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So here's one of Dan's experiments. You have two groups of people, you ask them to do a complex task, and one of them, you just explain it to them and they sit down and do it. And the other, while you're explaining it, you do something really annoying, like accept a call and talk for a really long time as they sit there waiting, and then you finish the explanation. And what is the consequence?
Yeah, so this was, so we annoyed people mostly in coffee shops by being rude to them, a little rude to them, not very big. And then when we paid them at the end, we said, hey, we're going to pay you $5 for this. We actually gave them $9. And we said, here's your $5. Please count it and sign a receipt for $5. So first of all, some people don't return the money, but the annoyed people never return the money. Now, here's the disturbing thing. So there's a question of agency. So imagine that I annoy you, and then you can either take it up on me, or you can take it on Duke, right? Would you care, right? So we got the same acting student that annoyed people for us for a living. We got him to annoy people and tell them that it was his research and his money, or he told them that it was some professor's research and some professor's money. The question is, would you care? So imagine you go to the Gap and the salesperson annoys you. And if it's the Gap, if you take revenge against the store, the salesperson would not suffer. What if it was a store owned by the person who annoyed you? Would it be different? So this is one of the cases where I was sure it would matter a lot. I was sure that people would revenge against the person if they were the one who were going to suffer. It turns out people don't care. Somebody annoys you, somebody is going to pay. I don't care so much. Somebody is going to pay. That was kind of sad, actually.
Can you turn that, okay, so knowing that, can you turn that to some practical intervention in some problem? Can you devise some way of doing something in a company or in social, a public policy or something?
So first of all, it looks like lots of companies are trying very hard to annoy us as a practice. But this actually is one of the questions of outsourcing. So when things like customer service are outsourced, what are the chances that the company that has been outsourced would care about your company in the same way that people who work there? Not as much. What's the chances that it will annoy people to a higher degree? Quite higher. And who pays the cost? People don't care who annoyed them. It's the company who is eventually going to pay the cost. So actually there's a bigger lesson there, which is revenge is an incredibly powerful instinct. It turns out that people just when we feel betrayed, we're willing to go to tremendous extents to get the offending party punished. Just look at YouTube and see how many people are editing videos trying to express their hate to these organizations. But revenge is actually quite interesting. So imagine a game. Okay? Imagine that we have a game between two people, player A and player B. And we give player A $100. And you say, player A, you can do two things with this $100. You can either keep it and go home, or you can send it to player B. If you send it to player B, the money would quadruple. So by the time player B gets it, they'll have $400. And now player B can do one of two things. They could go home, in which case you, player A, will get nothing, or they can send back $200. Now, if player B was perfectly rational, what would they do? They would go home with all their money. And if you were player A and you thought player B was perfectly rational, would you give them the money? Of course not. But turns out people are nice in economic theory. Often people give the money and often people reciprocate. That's kind of the good news. Here's the bad news. Imagine you were all player A and you send the money to player B and you don't know who they are and they took your money and went home. And I come to you and I say, sorry player A, you just lost all this money, but I'll tell you what. If you go into your checking account and you pay me, Dan, for every dollar you would give me, I will go and I will hunt player B down for you. I will find them, and every dollar you give me, I will take $2 away from them. Now think to yourself, if you just trusted somebody and they betrayed your trust, would you be willing to lose more money to get that bastard to suffer even more? Right? How many people think they would? I mean, now you're sitting here, it's comfortable, it's not so... How many people here ever got divorced? Go back to those days and tell yourself that you will not... I mean, there's a whole profession built on the fact that people are willing to exert revenge on other people. So it turns out that trust is a wonderful thing to have, and where more trust in economic theory predicts. Revenge is a kind of a terrible thing to have, but in fact it helps trust. Because if we live in a society that has revenge, trust is actually easier to sustain. If you know that if you did something really terrible, there will be kind of a doomsday machine, there will be a revengeful act against you, there's more chance that you will actually behave nicely. So it's kind of interesting to think about how two irrational behavior on their own self actually makes some sense in the global scheme.
I got two more questions for you. Here's one of them. I was a colleague of the person who invented the phrase irrational exuberance. And then we came to associate that with bubbles and crashes and downturns and all of that. And of course, an interesting lesson is whenever bubbles burst, we instantly vow that this will never happen again, in spite of the fact that it's happened every 20 years or so for the whole of modern recorded history, right? Do you believe that because humans are irrational, there always will be irrational exuberance and that there always will be moments of excess confidence followed by the kind of disaster that follows from that?
Yeah, so the research on bubbles is actually very clear, that you put people in a situation in which we can follow the herd, and they can feel that they might regret not joining a trend when it's happening, and they still think it's on the uprise. You get bubbles incredibly easy. Okay. So if you think about what are the recipes for bubble, it's the recipe in which we look at other people, we think that other people are having a party, we are not really participating in that party to a large degree, and we think the trend is going up. And that's the recipe for a bubble. It's very easy and very hard to prevent. In fact, you need lots of self-discipline not to get into it.
This leads me straight to my second question and my last. If I worked on all the things you worked on, all the passions, desires, irrationalities, whims of human nature, I guess the question it raises for me is, do you feel that human self-knowledge is promoted by knowing the things you learn? Or is it only knowledge of the foibles of others?
So I think there's kind of, first of all, I think at some level, people do recognize some mistakes on their own accord. I don't think we recognize the same mistakes that we recognize in others, but I think we can recognize some mistakes on our own accord. When they're pointed out to us by how other people behave, we can sometimes see that happening. I think the real question, though, is when are those behaviors, when is self-knowledge actually detrimental? And I'll give you one example that I've been kind of debating with. So you all know the placebo effect. Right? It turns out the placebo effect is real, in the sense that if I give you an injection with water with some salt, but I have a white coat and you think I'm a doctor, your brain will secrete a substance very much like opioids, very much like opium or heroin. Right? And you would get actually pain relief, just not from the injection, from your brain. Now, you can't close your eyes and say, please, please, can I have some pain relief? That doesn't work like this. But if you get an injection from an outside source, your body can secrete a substance for it. And we actually, in our research, we show that if you think we gave people pills, not injections. If you think the pill is more expensive, you get more relief. If you think it's discounted, you get less relief. If you think the brand is good, you get more relief. The brand is bad, you get bad relief. People who play golf and think they're playing with fake golfs don't play as well. I mean, all kinds of things like that. The question is, what happens when you tell people about it? And it turns out that if you tell people that what they're getting is water with some salt, it doesn't work. Right? So there are some things that make us happy or change the physiology of our brain, but it only works when we don't know that this is the case. Okay. And those are kind of the tricky questions about when do you not tell people, because by telling them you actually are making the effect go away.
It's fantastic. Okay, so I said that was your last question, but here's one more. I heard a rumor that you are trying to help people think of another name for generic drugs because the name generic suggests cheap, and things that are cheap are much less satisfactory in their effects than things that are expensive.
So yeah, so actually I called some favors from some executive in advertising companies earlier today, and I had a meeting with actually 16 people showed up, which was very nice of them, and they spent 5 hours thinking about how do we change this word generic. It's a really very unfortunate word. People who get generic think that like the doctor doesn't like them so much, or their company is treating them badly. They expect it to be worse. The compliance is lower. It's really kind of a terrible word. Not so terrible for the drug, for the brand medication, but for the healthcare system, it's really bad. So they basically spent 6 hours. It was kind of interesting to see how people in advertising think, and they came up with lots of ideas, and I'm hoping we'll go back and start testing some of those. Cool. But it was a very nice exercise. It was interesting to see them think.
Well, I got the fun. You all came here hoping you could ask a question, but instead I got to ask them all. So this was very enjoyable for me. You are fantastic. But we'll take a couple questions. There's so many people, and we'll be here for a good hour afterward. But are there a question or two in the house?
Well, actually, can I say one more thing about cheating? What kind of personality trait do you think predicts cheating? Like you could say people are high and low on something, extrovert, introvert. What kind of personality trait would predict cheating? Sorry? Insecure. Interesting. What else? None. Desperate. Arrogance. What else? Need for achievement. Religious. In which direction? So you know, there's lots of possibilities. We've only tested 2. We've tested intelligence. What do you think? No effect. But we tested creativity. And creative people do cheat more. Now, how do we explain this? How do we explain this? In our understanding of cheating is about trying to balance 2 goals. We try to look in the mirror and feel wonderful about ourselves. We try to feel that we're wonderful human beings. And we also try to benefit from cheating. Now you could say, how can you do both? You do one or the other. It turns out that if you have a flexible psychology, and as long as you cheat just a little bit, you can do both. But creative people can do more, right? Because if it's all about cheating or telling ourselves stories about why what we've done is okay, we all of a sudden can achieve better heights of cheating. Tax is a good example for this. So, the more creative you are, the better chances are there more be business expenses on your tax returns.
Here's one in the back.
Hi.
I work in marketing, and I'm particularly fascinated by the intersection of neuroscience and branding and marketing. And you know, we look at things like the Coke-Pepsi test, and we see the exact type of irrational behavior that you talked about tonight.
Yeah.
But when we try to analyze it, we typically look to things like the limbic brain and the fight or flight instinct. And we say that, oh, this is evolutionarily hardwired in human beings. And I'm curious to know if you trace, I'm curious about the why behind some of the things that you're finding. And do you also trace it back to instinct and the limbic brain, or do you think it's more a function of modern society in some way and culture?
Great question.
Yeah, so of course, it's not one answer for all irrationalities. There's one way to be rational, there are many ways to be irrational. And we use lots of our parts. And actually what's interesting is that the world is testing our rationality to an extreme every time. Think about something like texting and driving, right? New invention out there. There's a recent paper by one of my colleagues who basically said 100 years ago, what did we die of? And died of lots of things. 10% was about human making mistakes and dying because of our mistakes. 5 years ago, death by this bad decision making accounted for 50% of our death, right? Obesity, I mean, you can just think about all the ways in which smoking, all the ways in which bad decision leads to mortality. So basically, we create more and more ways to kind of test our irrationality, and when we fail, like texting and driving, we fail in a big way. Actually, one more unrelated point. You know what happened in states when they banned texting and driving? Death goes up. Why? Because instead of texting over the wheel, people text under the wheel. Right? It's like there's no limit to stupidity. Right?
What would you say is the policy takeaway of that point?
So I think there are some things you just can't tempt people to do. It's almost not right to put a big bowl of donuts here and ask you not to eat. And cell phones are incredibly tempting. You know, my students have this temptation all the time. If I let them have their laptops and Facebook on, can they really listen to the lecture? Very unlikely. Anyway, back to your point. There's a beautiful paper that did the Coke-Pepsi test while putting people in an fMRI. So imagine you sit there in a big magnet and they look at your brain and what the blood flow in the brain, what parts of the brain are activated, and they give you Coke or Pepsi when you don't know what they are or when you know what they are. Now what happens? The limbic part of the brain, the part of the brain that reacts to pleasure, cannot distinguish Pepsi from Coke, right? Doesn't know. You can't detect it based on the signal of the brain. But what happened to Coke with this group, they were a group in Texas, what happened to Coke with this group is that actually it was the frontal part of the brain, a part of the brain that is connected to high order association and thinking, imagination, metaphors, all of those things were more connected to Coke than to Pepsi. So if you say from a pleasure perspective, the part of the brain that reacts to sugar reacts the same way. They have the same amount of sugar. But what Coke got over Pepsi with this population, which were all Coke lovers, was a part of the brain is connected to higher order association, imagination, being American, 4th of July. We don't know what they were, right? But it was the kind of memories and association that you would expect in that part of the brain. And what's interesting is that this part of the brain, the frontal part of the brain, actually has a projection. There's a neural pathway that goes back to the pleasure centers of the brain. So it's a very strange idea. It's the idea that you can have thoughts associated with the consumption that then goes back and changes the symbolic understanding and the actual pleasure of the brain. I'll tell you one other, can I?
Sure.
One thing?
He's answering the next question now.
So a few months ago, no, a year ago, I gave a talk at Harper's Bazaar, you know, the magazine, and I didn't know why they wanted me, but I sat in front of the most beautifully dressed 100 women I've ever seen. And, you know, I talked, they seemed to enjoy it, but at the end of the talk, Valerie, the publisher of the magazine, gave me a Prada bag. And now everybody was excited, right? So anyway, I walked around New York with this big Prada bag, and I'm thinking, you know, what do I do with the Prada big signal, the big symbol? Do I show it to the outside world so everybody would know I have a Prada? Or do I turn it around and walk it in a way that nobody but me knows it's a Prada? I decided to go next to me, just to me, so I am the only one that knew. But what amazed me was that I still felt I was walking around with a Prada bag. And usually we think about fashion as something that we transmit something to other people, right? Like the peacock, right? We tell people who we are. But this was something that I was telling myself something. I was walking around saying, I am walking with a Prada bag. I was thinking, you know, what would happen if I had like Ferrari underwear?
Apparently he doesn't.
But anyway, this made me think about how much fashion is about telling other people who we are and how much of it is about telling ourselves.
Yeah. See, that's an amazing story, because take it back to the thing about generic, because the point there is generic means there's no metaphors, no associations. It's just like the thing without the patterns of meaning that are woven into it. So in some sense, you don't need another name. You need a whole different mental process to be attached to it. Listen, you're going to have really fun asking this guy questions. Come up, every one of you, and ask him a question one by one. This has been a fantastic evening. I said before, no. I said before he was full of curiosity and creativity, but now I know that creative people are more less honest than others. And so I will only say that he is a person full of curiosity and ingenuity, and one smart guy. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
You're great. Fantastic.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.